someone explained to me like the whole contributor thing, right? Like, hey, no, you can write for these really big publications. They need content, right? So I found a dude, I think in Pakistan, and I think it was like $50. And I said, just find me, I think it was top 50 or 100 business publications. I want the editor and their contact information. In like 2 days, he found it. And then I gave him the form email. I let him from my email send the emails out. And I got a few hits, right? Not everyone, but I think I ended up getting serious interest from Fortune, Forbes, and there was one other that was a little further down. But to me, I was like, I could tell from the Forbes guy that I had a real shot at that. And then it was just, it took me still a couple months to convince him, like, yep, the writing's going to be good, like all that. But then once I got that in, then it was off to the races, because a lot of those contributor platforms, you have full back-end access to the system, right? Like it's really on a good faith system, and you have to use that with pride and be, ethical and all that good stuff. But it's really an amazing resource once you're sort of in the dojo.
Hello and welcome to DTC. My name is Eric Dick, co-founder of DTC. And today we are lucky to have Afif Ghannoum with us from BIOHM. Now, Afif is the CEO of BIOHM Health. He is a biotechnology attorney and an FDA regulatory expert. He has founded 3 biotechnology companies with over 15 million in private equity financing, launched products over 25 million in retail stores, and licensed the technology to a global pharmaceutical company for products sold in 100,000 stores. So he started BIOHM by capitalizing on an amazing discovery that his relatively famous bioscientist father made, and he's innovated the red hot gut space to the tune of 7-figure monthly sales. I don't know if that's safe to say. We can ask him in a little bit, but also like to say a quick welcome to Kyle Guilfoyle, the voice of the DTC newsletter, who's joining us on this interview. And a quick note too, a shout out to My First Million. We're obviously huge fans of what the hustle and the trends are doing. And so we're always watching and listening to their podcast. We love their group as well. And so when I posted, I think one of our very first interviews that we ever did in the My First Million group, just as sort of a kickoff, Afif responded and was just super keen on being involved and getting on. So I was super happy to welcome you to the D2C podcast today, Afif. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, nice. Well, your story is kind of ubiquitous. I think that's part of what we're going to talk about today. You can search your name, you can search BIOHM, and you're not only going to find your store and your ads, but you're going to find a whole network of kind of other content that you've kind of put out there by yourself, much like maybe a network of fungi, you might even say. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your story in the elevator version?
Yeah, totally. So, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I'm a biotech attorney by background. And basically about 10 years ago, I was slogging away. And you hear a version of this story a lot, but I was slogging away at a big law firm. And my dad is truly a world famous scientist. And it's goofy to talk about him because he's my dad. But, he's, Washington Post called him the leading microbiome researcher in the world. Like he's that kind of level scientist. So he's a true, to this day, like lab rat. He loves it. So about 10 years ago, he had this really cool invention on a pretty obscure thing, like how to prevent infections in catheters. And it was really, really interesting, super pumped, his patents, all these things. And these guys created a company around it. And he ended up with like 1% of the company. And I was like angry about this because I just felt like he had been cheated. So after that, I said, you know what? It was like right after the bad recession in 2008. And I said, if I'm going to make a move, I'd rather do it and try and, sort of bring my dad's academic science out of the ivory tower into, products. And we did that first by buying an old GlaxoSmithKline brand called Oasis. And we just innovated off that. Ended up selling products in about 27,000 stores and really built, expertise around taking science, consumerizing it with heavy duty science in the background and then launching it. And then with BIOHM, that's exactly what we did. So he had found that, have you guys ever heard of biofilm? Have you ever heard that term?
Biofilm?
Yeah.
No.
So the biofilm you're familiar with is plaque on your teeth, right? So what happens is, and I'll keep this like non-sciencey, but basically you want to get rid of plaque because underneath are germs causing big issues. What my father discovered is that same phenomena happens in the gut, right? It's digestive biofilm. And he found it in Crohn's patients doing a big clinical trial. So when he published that work in 2016, he talked about the role of fungus in the gut. And, we kind of looked in the market, we're like, no one's talked about this. No one's, everybody talks about gut bacteria, but no one had talked about fungi in the gut. So I thought, it's kind of interesting. And we developed BIOHM to actually counteract what was going on in this biofilm. And we, did studies at Case Western School of Medicine. And from there, we just, hit the ground running.
Very cool. And like, how quick did you know that you had a hit on your hands? Like, obviously, whenever you're going into a highly competitive space, like probiotics, for instance, or anything, differentiator is the key. And for you to be able to come into the market space with a totally different take on things, that no one else was really covering, was it just an instant hit?
So I had a pretty good idea we were onto something, because to give you sort of the timeline, and this is the other thing, like if we have an idea, we come to market fast. So he had this paper in September 2016. October, I formed the company, and we launched March 1, right? So I had a pretty good inkling we were onto something, because Forbes, I kind of approached them, and people always ask me, like, how do you end up doing articles for Forbes? I hired someone off Upwork. I had him reach out to, 50 business magazines. I basically told him, look, this is what we're up to. We think it's really innovative. Let us document the journey for you. For me, I thought, man, if we can get one of these guys to follow us, that's going to be a great sort of pre-launch strategy, right? So Forbes, super interested. And I did maybe like 10, 15 articles for them. And I knew then, because I was getting a lot of feedback from people that they were excited about it, that we were probably onto something. And then the day we launched, March 1, Goop, which is Gwyneth Paltrow's like sort of mega wellness site, they ran a big Q&A with my dad, and our first day of sales was like, $28,000 or something. So I knew then, okay, we're onto something. We actually dialed it back a little bit, because you never know. When you launch, it could be a total dud. But D2C, what I love about it is, you can kind of control that a little bit. But yeah, so that was my first inkling we might be onto something.
It's interesting. You mentioned control, because it's like your mindset with getting all that content out there and getting into Forbes. It's not everyone's first instinct in a lot of ways. A lot of people want to talk with D2C. It's like, you do have control over your ads. You put your ads in there, you spend a certain amount, you can expect a certain amount back. And I'm sure you've kind of worked that out now. But we love the idea with D2C of things that you do that provide halo effects for all your other efforts. And it seems like that's something you've done with your product, and also with this content approach when it comes to getting as many eyeballs on the brand from different perspectives. Like, I even saw stuff in different mushroom publications that you were covering. Can you speak a little bit about that, like, broad content strategy?
100%. So basically from day one, I knew I had something really unique with my father, in that he was like, I always take the approach, if Procter & Gamble came tomorrow, could they destroy us? And the way for us, we always tried to differentiate, was that the thing they can't replicate was my dad. So I mirrored it off, kind of positioning him as like James Dyson of the microbiome, right? Like the singular kind of inventor. Now, my dad's not like a slick TV guy. He's got a very thick Lebanese accent. So even then, sometimes he's not, he comes off, it's actually worked to our advantage, because he's not slick at all. He comes off like a scientist. So from day one, we had, I hired the PR firm. They're awesome. Blaze PR, I highly recommend them. They had done the launch work for Kavita, the kombucha. Mm-hmm. So I knew they knew in the space, the publications that would really be interested in this. So pre-launch, my strategy was, let's create an echo chamber, get all this content out there. And a lot of people ask me, because they see, like, we've done a lot of publications, like we were on NPR National half-hour interview, all the way to Muscle and Fitness, in Goop, which is kind of the other side of the spectrum. And they say, oh, does it help with sales? Some, yeah, they'll definitely generate sales. Like Goop is, about as reliable as you can find. Like, if they have such a loyal audience. But for me, the main thing was that once you have all that content, you can leverage that content in advertising and SEO. Like, on our back end, our SEO, like, if I always forget how to pronounce it, but Ahrefs, okay. We have really strong backlinks. Why? So that, so it's sort of building an ecosystem, because by the time I'm having conversations like we are, you go look us up, we're very credible, right? Because we've taken a lot of time and we put a lot of investment into PR relationships. And the way I look at it is basically renting their traffic, right? Because I knew not only does Goop have a big audience that I'm not going to have on day one, if they're vouching for us, their audience is going to be, much warmer coming into our funnels.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's an approach you see all the time in the information space, right? And you have created so many different kinds of content, from your publication on Forbes and Goop. I also noticed that you guys have come out with a book, or you're coming out with a book, and I'm just wondering if one of these content tracks have had an outsized impact versus the rest, and if so, what would you recommend most DTC brands sort of narrow in on?
100%. So let me answer those in sequence. Content from quality publications begets more content from amazing publications. It really works like that. So I started off once I had that Forbes piece, and that was not rocket science. I literally would reach out. I can even off here, I'll share you the email I did to introduce myself. And I just said, here's some content. I had my own little blog at the time. Like, I can write about this. Here's why I'm credible. This is why it's interesting in your audience. And by the way, as I build my email list, I'm going to start emailing, their list. Like, one of the guys I love is, obviously everybody knows him, Russell Brunson. He always talks about, listen, if you want people to deal with you, you have to explain why you're going to create value for them, right? So every step of the way, we've done that, right? So with the book, that Goop article came out, and literally almost instantly, I had book agents reaching out saying, like, this is a book, like this idea of fungi in the gut. So we did a whole process with all like the major publishers, and Norton gave us, the best deal. But in our synopsis of why you should take the book, I said, I'm building a giant audience through BIOHM, and we're going to leverage that to move book sales, right? And they love that, because most people are talking about, the content, and it's interesting. These people, a book is a consumer product. A publication, an article, it's a consumer product. They're trying to just, like, why are people going to care about this? What are you going to do to drive views? So anytime I'm reaching out to a podcast, and now obviously once we're along now that we get, wellness podcasts reaching out to us, and you just develop relationships. It's like anything, right? But my recommendation to, anybody sort of doing this is, in your niche, and it can be pretty broad. There's critically important publications in the space. So the way I looked at it was, I saw, looking at other brands, the savvy brands would link to articles talking about them, right? So for us in wellness, it was like Well and Good, it was Mind Body Green, obviously Goop, and these were obviously resonating with a very passionate audience. So I would figure out, okay, in your industry, what are those publications that people rely on, right? And just like a banshee, go after them. And some hit, some don't, And so, it really, I always say this, it's not rocket science, but the rocket science part is, you have to be consistent. You have to, I am the king of annoying follow-up. Like, I will not, like, if Eric had not gotten back to me, I would have emailed him about 80 times, right?
Yeah.
And, that's how sometimes you get the first domino to fall,
Yeah.
Yeah, and just before we get into a little bit around how specifically you use that content in your overall funnel, I'm also curious about broader publications like the Wall Street Journal, which you've also been featured in, and because it sounds like you had a pretty good approach, to getting published, but you also mentioned that you hired a PR firm,
Yep.
and so I'm curious how that all ties in, and
So PR firms, I get asked about this a lot. Here's the way, and I say this to our investors as well as I say to other entrepreneurs. PR is either the best money you've ever spent or the worst money. If they get you a major publication, it's idiot proof. We're the smartest people in the room. Sometimes, and it's through no fault of their own, you don't get good publications, or it's not, maybe it's a quote here and there, but it's not these sort of dedicated pieces. I think we found the most success. Let me take a step back. my insight with PR firms is they have like 5 hot contacts. Like they have really good relationships with a certain set. And maybe for them, it might be podcasts. Other guys, it's like, you know, publications or online influencers, whatever their niche is, they're really good. If, you know, if you're dealing with a good PR firm, beyond that, they're reaching out cold like you would be reaching out cold. So anytime I had a PR firm, I was also doing stuff in the background the entire time. And you know, sometimes it ended up being where when it was getting down to like the leg work, logistics, I would rope in the PR firm. But you know, if there was someone I wanted to get into, I would work through the connections. And I got a lot of those good connections going to like conferences, right? So like the Expo Wests, Mind, Body, Green, Revitalize, like for us, those are important conferences, and just putting yourself out there. And you know, at the end of the day, if you're not a dick, people will deal with you, right? Like if you're a nice person, they see you're earnest, you're actually like not a shyster, which in, you know, the supplement world, sometimes, you know, is an issue. Like people really want to help you. And by the way, if you have something compelling, you're not bothering them to talk to them and say, listen, I think your audience would really like this, you know?
I think you really nailed it there. Like before all of this stuff is really needing to have a story. And it's the same thing that's true across any successful e-commerce brand, like even across PR, you know, we hear this again and again, you have to sell your story. And when you have a story that's different in an established space, that especially one that gives people, you know, one of the most powerful messages you can tell someone is, it's like, it's not your fault. You were doing the wrong thing. You didn't know that there was this other thing that we now know. And that's such a powerful marketing position to be able to have out there in the world. Is there anyone else who's caught up? Is there other people that have started to add fungi to their probiotics?
So there are probiotics that have fungi in them, but we specifically created it to balance out the bad bacteria, the bad fungi. So we're the first ones who kind of engineered that. And again, like my father, so there's the microbiome and then there's mycobiome, which is the fungal community of the body. My father literally is the scientist that named that. Now that's, again, gives us real differentiation, because we get approached about like, oh, do you want to, you know, launch this product? And we're like, listen, we're not going to be able to add the value because that's not our expertise, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, if I can, you know, leverage being able to do like heavy duty science, those things, that's going to make a difference, because at the end of the day, you have to also translate that to the consumer, right?
Nice. I just wanted to ask before we dive in, like, where's the business at now? I've seen some of the things you said about the funding and some of your ambassadors that you have doing some crazy things that we'll get into, but just give me a sense of where the company's at right now in its growth phase.
So we're quickly approaching pretty regularly over that 7-figure a month run rate. But, you know, I don't honestly really care about that as much as our like 24-month goal is to be doing that, but at 25, 30% EBITDA. Because to be honest, that's where I've raised quite a bit of money in number of ventures. For me, the best safety is in profitability, because you're seeing it now with COVID, you know, all these things go in cycles, and like being in Cleveland where we are, we're not in those worlds where it's just unending funding. And you're seeing it now. There's some brands that, you know, the spigot's been turned off and they're in serious trouble. So, you know, our team's 11 people. I know other companies maybe slightly bigger than us, they have 150 people, you know? So for us, that's really what we're focused on. And the other part is, you know, we're really heavy duty science-based, and we actually supply ingredients now to other companies like, you know, Iovate that makes like hydroxycut. They have BIOHM in some of their products. So, you know, we're really investing in the long run, just to be a heavy duty science-based company, you know?
Very cool.
Yeah, and ever since we had Tom Shipley on the podcast, and he talked.
He was great. I actually reached out to him because I was like, I had the entire team listen to that podcast because I'm like, this dude is just talking about critical KPIs. Like, I love that episode.
Nice.
Yeah, totally. And his the quote that he said was, "I don't give a shit about my top line. I give a shit about growing my bottom line while delighting my customers." And he put me onto, I was already a fan of Roland Frazier, but he put me onto his epic challenge and growing through acquisitions. And as someone who has a background in venture capital and increasing your profitability, I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to tactical ways you're approaching improving that EBITDA over the next several months?
100%. So we look at it in three buckets, right? Bucket number one is gross margin is so critical to control. And I will not approach any product idea before we understand what is our gross margin. And, you can't approach it like a CFO, because if you're just like, oh, we need, 65% margin, so we just price it here to do that. That doesn't work if now you're, 50% above the market. So it's really a little bit of a nuanced process, but like, first and foremost, we start with, are we able to maintain our gross margins, right? So that's, and there's multiple ways to do it, right? Like everybody thinks about just the product, but you can increase that, when you're looking at your COGS between, what are you doing on the shipping front? Are you really pushing your vendors in your supply chain on volume discounts? And then what are you doing on the shipping side, right? Because I think consumers are more and more realizing, like, listen, free shipping comes at a real cost to the company. They may not be able to do that sustainably, right? So those are sort of the levers on the gross margin side. The second bucket is just pure overhead, right? Like operations overhead, payroll, because that, especially when you're growing, could be probably, if depending on where you're at, like between that and marketing, your biggest expense. So we're really, really, really crazy about like, what can we cut? What can we keep, reasonable? And, the analogy someone once gave me is like, World War II, if a plane was hit, they would start throwing stuff out of the plane. The only thing they were not allowed to throw out was this like special scope that the Germans didn't have to really measure bombs. They're like, that cannot go out the window, right? So when we're looking at expenses, I know that sounds like a weird analogy, but we always talk about it is, listen, what is critical that we cannot cut? Anything to do with science is verboten. You cannot touch that. Our IT support firm that we're really not getting use out of, but costs us $2,500 a month, go back to them and tell them, like, you need to somehow make this $1,200 a month. You know what I mean? So those are choices. And now, obviously, with COVID, real estate is a huge one, right? So everybody's looking at that. But overhead is, for us, an important bucket. But those first two buckets are really easy for us to maintain. The third one, which is so critical and not rocket science to think about, is marketing as a percentage of your revenue. Marketing spends percentage of revenue. And so I actually brought a woman on from Ancient Nutrition, which is a fabulous company. She did a fabulous job for them. And really, she and I are working on like, okay, well, everybody's looking at marketing from the front of the equation, right? Like your paid acquisition cost, but really it's on the retention side where a lot of times you own those organic channels where you can really make a killing in building out LTV, all those things, and really make a difference and lower your marketing spend up front if you're efficient. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. My favorite analogy is that it's not a funnel, but it's an hourglass. And I think actually that'd be a great segue into how specifically you are using content along that funnel or hourglass, and yeah, just how you sort of think about it.
Right. So we use it in a couple different ways. One, and it ties into sort of the ambassador stuff we were talking about. We have a super robust ambassador program. We use a lot of that for user-generated content. Like they're fabulous testimonials because people know they're being authentic, and we don't have to go down the influencer. We can talk about that rabbit hole in a minute, but we use a lot of it for testimonial, social proof. A ton of what we use it for, right? And that's in and content's a few different things. One is obviously things like podcasts and articles, but then it's user reviews, right? That's content, and it's third-party content that people trust, so we utilize that. And the third is really as initial funnels. Like we don't do it now because it's become less efficient, but initially we were literally running people to the actual articles that we knew had links back to our site, right? So I think a lot of times people worry that if they're not driving all the traffic directly to their site, they're losing something in the funnel. We found out actually very efficient to run people to those Forbes articles, to Goop, Well and Good, all those things, and then just knowing that they'll percolate through the links in these articles.
Which you use UTMs on to track, or just sort of monitor sales?
So depending on who it was, sometimes we had UTM, sometimes we didn't. But yeah, if we can, we will.
Yeah.
By the way, I have to mention there's a really cool tool that is very useful when you're driving content to like someone else's website, like Forbes or whatever. I'm just trying to find the name of it, but what it does is it actually, when you like say you're running an ad to that piece of content on Forbes, let's say, a little sticky thing will pop up in the bottom left-hand corner that gives you the opportunity to put in a call to action where they can find out more, and it sort of just follows you down the piece of content. I'll find that out and I'll share it later.
Cool.
Yeah, and so the other thing though I really want to mention with content, especially if you ever do paid content, which we actually found to be very, very efficient. What I would say, because you got to remember all these publications, except for maybe the mega ones, you doing a deal with them will keep the lights on for the month, right? Especially some of these that they seem big, but they're actually like 5 people running. So I would always say, listen, if I'm going to pay for you to do an article, I need it to be in a dedicated email blast. And I'd want to understand those metrics, because obviously maybe not obviously, but email's still like super powerful. The other thing I would do, we do this with our heavy duty influencers, and then some content people will do it, some won't. We'll ask them to actually run ads on our behalf, and we'll pay for the ad spend to their audience, or we'll pixel their content. So there's different ways to get like a lot of utility out of it. Now, again, some guys will do that, some guys won't, but it's any way you can make your spend more efficient by leveraging other people's, ecosystems.
Totally. We talk about that all the time. It's funny. We sort of incepted ourselves. We're the Pilot House digital agency. And we're, one of our major pitches to clients is, hey, we're all about building these sort of third-party brands that leverage promotion, leverage publicity into these like super engaging landing page experiences that increase engagement, increase ROAS. Essentially, it's funny. It's what we did with DTC. We created a third-party content brand. We're still sort of Pilot House. We're working towards building out our own P&L essentially. But yeah, that's the one step further that I'd be interested to ask if you've explored is like actually leveraging, you drive direct to those pages. That's great. But have you ever tried like combining one page that sort of like really brings together all that high level third party branding and then drives people down through like a story funnel?
Kind of. So we're in the middle now of like SEO is a giant initiative for us internally. So that is all activated. One thing we're doing along those lines is in kind of touching on what you just said about DTC and Pilot House is a couple of years ago, we started rolling out our own microbiome focused podcast, right? So the idea was, making it accessible. Again, not rocket science. That's one of the big challenges in wellness is how do you make these important wellness topics accessible to consumers? But what I found it very useful to do was if there were guests or publications I wanted to get on, one of the big value propositions for them is like, listen, if you come on our, if you let me on your podcast, like you can come on ours. And, it's just a nice ecosystem. And honestly creates great value for them. We do Microbiome Monday emails. So it's like pure content for the consumer. And it also gives us another leverage point when we're trying to do partnerships, giveaways, all those kind of things, that they actually have a platform to come on. And our blog, we did the same thing. Our blog gets a ton of traffic. So, you really have to think about how to mapping out, because the worst thing you can do is like try and get 1 or 2 content pieces or pay for content. And it's really without purpose. It really needs to be methodical, which again, all this stuff sounds very basic, but it's not, because you really have to plan it out. You really have to be purposeful about it.
So it is rocket science.
So it is.
I like it. So yeah, let's jump onto the marketing side of things. I took a look at your ads. They look excellent. Obviously you're testing a lot of different things. I'm interested in your perspective on that third bucket or fourth bucket, I guess, of how you view your marketing spend, your cold, your retargeting, and then bleed that into your ambassador success that you've had.
Yeah, so the way we look at it, and it's funny, you're seeing, we literally just refreshed our campaigns because I don't know, it seems like other people are seeing this, but in COVID, we saw sort of like prices really dip and now prices are coming back up. And so some of the campaigns started becoming really inefficient. We're like, you know what, let's take a step back and start refreshing a lot of the creative. Now sort of a good, we take a plateau approach, right? Like sort of push up the mountain, get to a point where, okay, it's starting to slow down a little bit. And at that point, refresh, maybe take a half step back in efficiency to, keep going up the mountain. So, we're really pushing now. What you're seeing is the middle of like our refresh of our full funnels, up from like pure top funnel to like, mid funnel retargeting, sort of testimonials, all those things. And then obviously carousel type content. But again, it's like a never ending process. What I always tell people is in 2012, I launched a product called Halo. It was a spray that kills airborne germs you breathe in. That we launched in 27,000 stores. We had a $3 million marketing budget that we spent in 8 weeks on one television ad. That was it, right? One piece of creative, 15 seconds, like you can still find it today. Nowadays, and you guys know this better than everyone, it is like unending creative, and it's like, frankly, exhausting, Yes. So that's something where it's just, I almost feel bad for people getting into it and not really having someone to explain to them, like, listen, this is complicated. It's not simple, but it's also not hard when you understand conceptually what you're doing, right? Like top of funnel, middle funnel, lower funnel. But it's where these things like content, ambassadors really come into play. So on the ambassador front, we did a couple things. One, I literally had like very junior people and college interns were just building laundry lists, like hundreds, if not thousands of people in various verticals on Instagram. So for us, it was, kind of overlooking verticals in wellness, right? So everybody in probiotics was typically going after nutritionists or like your classic wellness influencer. We went adjacent to that, kind of going after the keto world a little bit. So it's like bodybuilders, CrossFitters, and just sort of derivatives off of that really, they're very much into fitness, but no one's really talking to them about wellness products. And it was not very complicated. You just reach out, hey, love to send you a sample. We'd send them a sample of 3 of the products, check in a few days later. What do you think? If they like it, maybe they posted, maybe they're willing to. And then if they liked it, hey, we have this ambassador program. You can make 15, 20%. Here's your link. And then slowly but surely we built it up. And what we found was like, 90-ish% of them generate, between 10 and $100 a month in sales. But there's a couple of whales that will really, really outside. So we have this one influencer. She generates just herself 200,000 plus a month in sales. And we cut her $20,000 plus commission checks every month. And she's phenomenal. She's like our unicorn. And it was one, like, and by the way, she didn't start out that way. For 18 months, she did a little bit, and then she just sort of caught her groove. Her audience started building, and it just, but it came from
what she's doing.
Yeah, are you able to speak to that?
So she's our. I'm very like offline. I'll gladly share who she is. But what she is hyper authentic with her audience. Like her classic things, like she'll just tell it like it is. If she doesn't like something, she is very upfront about it. And if she loves something, she talks about it incessantly, right? So, and then we'll do very special things for her, right? Like we'll give her, IG lives with my dad, or, things on Snapchat. We'll give her a lot of access to things, or like we'll send her sample prototype products. Like, what do you think? Like she loves that because, obviously we're invested in the relationship too. And I think that's something that a lot of brands overlook. They think, I'm just going to send you a bunch of assets, and if you're getting commission, and why aren't you selling stuff? And it's like, no, you have to show these people like that you really care about their relationship. And frankly, some of the people we spend the most time with, they don't really generate much in sales, but man, their testimonial videos are amazing for us. You know what I mean? Like, they're really, and we'll use those in email funnels. So, but the part that surprises people is we don't use an agency. It is just lock and loaded, just spreadsheet, jockey, unending, reach out.
And endless iteration. right? That's the secret. You just have to be on that. It's a hamster wheel a little bit, and you get, it refines over time. It's a bit of a flywheel. You get better with your assumptions and the connections you make over time. But yeah, it's a grind.
But I want to address that actually, because I think that content can be more of a system than a grind, or like being on this endless hamster wheel. And I feel like, Afif, I feel like you've kind of gotten close to that in a way. You've sort of built a content system that works for you by, you know, creating these like key assets. And I'm wondering, like, is my hunch there totally off, or is that about right? And if so, like, yeah, I'd just love to hear about the kind of system and how it all comes together.
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to priority, right? Especially like a lot of publications. So one of our secret weapons too that we get a lot of play with publications is we'll say, listen, we'll send you a microbiome test and we'll have my dad personally walk you through your results, right? Like that is serious value for that journalist, right? And you know, it's interesting for their audience. So a lot of it is like, we look for those points. So really the system is, it's sort of descending order of priority. And that's not because of not caring about everyone. It's impossible to do it well for everyone, right? So you kind of have to pick your point. So, you know, we have sort of descending order where my dad or, you know, myself, like a lot of times we're talking about like the father-son angle. And then even beyond that, like we have, you know, a couple of nutritionists that are just, you know, they've reviewed thousands of microbiome reports. They know the space in and out, and we'll make them available for other pieces. But a lot of it is about just methodically keeping track of all the PR. If you're reaching out to a publication, having a rock solid reach out email, and then following up. Like people really underestimate that. And again, I talked through it really quickly, but the Forbes thing is a perfect example. So in my mind, I can't remember. I don't remember who it was, but someone explained to me like the whole contributor thing, right? Like, hey, no, you can write for these really big publications. They need content, right? So I found a dude, I think in Pakistan, and I think it was like $50. And I said, just find me, you know, I think it was top 50 or 100 business publications. I want the editor and their contact information. In like 2 days, he found it. And then I gave him the form email. I let him from my email send the emails out. And I got a few hits, right? Not everyone, but I think I ended up getting serious interest from Fortune, Forbes, and there was one other that was a little further down. But, you know, to me, I was like, I could tell from the Forbes guy that I had a real shot at that. And then it was just, it took me still a couple months to convince him, like, yep, the writing's going to be good, like all that. But then once I got that in, then it was off to the races, because a lot of those contributor platforms, you have full back-end access to the system, right? Like it's really on a good faith system, and you have to use that with pride and be, you know, ethical and all that good stuff. But it's really an amazing resource once you're sort of in the dojo.
Cool. I wanted to talk more about this halo effect that you have with so much attention to your ambassador program, so much attention to retention. I assume the product is not a subscription product, or do you have a subscription aspect to it?
We do. Yep. So you can buy it one time or subscription.
Nice. And obviously that's preferable. But with all this attention you're putting into your LTV of your customer, I'm wondering what that's allowed you to do on your front end. We're always interested in working with advertisers that have this good handle on their customers' lifetime value, so that they're able to front load their media spend in order to acquire those customers. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like for BIOHM?
Yeah, so I can't talk about like the specifics, but the way the analysis I always use, and I entered into DTC with this, was Proactive Solutions, which everyone knows about the acne guys. I remember we were buying for that old product. We were buying Remnant TV, which is basically direct response TV. It's like 60% off, but you don't have much control over when the ads run, but you can end up with like an HGTV ad for, you know, $400 or something instead of 2,000. So I got to know the media agency pretty well, and they had done a lot of stuff for Proactive, and they were saying like, yeah, you don't realize they basically lose money on that first purchase, but they know that guy's going to stick around 6 months, right? So it may, you know, cost them $40 to acquire, but they'll end up making $200 over the 6 months. So that always kind of stuck with me. So from day one, we did that, but the caveat there is you have to be very careful, because if you don't have pretty heavy capital, it can, even though you may make the money over time, you can get crushed if something's off, or for whatever reason subscriptions drop. Like, you got to be really careful. So we're mindful of that. We don't like overly pot commit with what we're willing to pay for a consumer, but we are willing to pay more, obviously, for someone that we're able to get them into a subscription. But that's one of a number of the things we're toying with now, right? Like, I don't remember his name now, but he one of your guys talked about this really interesting subscription funnel, right? Where it was like really cheap up front, and then he hit people with like a 25% off sale. That, I was like, that is really smart, So
Acquire and harvest.
Acquire and harvest. Yeah, that was the term. Yeah. So I actually went to the team and I'm like, what do you guys think about this? And there's balance, right? Because you're going to get a ton of it. Obviously, I don't know what he's doing, but like the trade-off is you're going to get a lot of numbers, but you're probably going to get your churn going up, so it becomes a little bit of a trade-off. So,
and you talked about that in the podcast, is not, it's like a drug as well, right? You kind of become, it's stimulus, right? You get used to this, this situation, and then you train your customers that way too. So it's an interesting approach. It'd be interesting to watch the two, because you guys are in a similar space, I guess, right? It'd be interesting to kind of watch the trajectories.
Yeah, they have a really interesting company. I hadn't actually heard of them before, but yeah, I reached out to him actually after the show. And I was like, man, I learned a lot from you. Thank you. It was really, that's the thing that's really fascinating about this area of like what I kind of call performance marketing, is it is unending of the innovation coming out of it. Like we would literally solve climate change if we put the energy towards that, because like it's very, very creative. Like the way he's talking about getting AOV up by doing like a flash sale, 25%, like this, super smart, So
yeah. You have that opportunity to be an expert all the time, and to be on that cutting edge, where the thing that you're doing, that you're just thinking of doing, could be the thing that, pivots the industry, or that becomes really popular, right?
Right, but that will never be a substitute for a product that's not good. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes people forget that, right? Like they'll say, like Ryan Deiss, he talks a lot about the fact that, like, listen, digital marketing is like kind of a tool to sell products efficiently. It's not the product. You know what I mean? Like, so that's something that I think a lot of people, especially like, you're in these groups like I am, like sometimes you see what people are putting up and you're like, dude, this is like this side of like very shady, or like, you might have a blip, or, you're not going to, especially now, I think it's really difficult to do D2C if you don't have an actual differentiation.
Totally. Yeah. My favorite thing Ryan Deiss said was you don't have a traffic problem, you have an offer problem. And I think that speaks to that. And also, when it comes to differentiation, one of the things that really stuck out to me about, what you do in your story is that you seem to distill the expertise that you did that with your father, and you turn that into a product. And my hunch is you've done that with other products as well. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit about how brands can find expertise to apply it to their brand so that they have that differentiation baked into it.
Great question. And before I forget, the other guy who I follow like a hawk is Craig Clemens of Golden Hippo. That guy, my personal opinion, he's the smartest guy in D2C. That is an amazing company. Like, so it's cool to see them getting recognition. So I just want to actually at least mention that. Cool. So to your question, there's a couple of approaches. One, and I know this because we get approached a lot. There's a lot of guys like my dad. They have this really, really interesting expertise, but they are not marketers. They have they just don't know what to do, right? So like, it's actually not that difficult to find, where I would mine for this, and this is like what I would do if I wasn't doing this with my dad. I would literally approach some of these guys that have best-selling books, and I would say, listen, you don't have any products. You obviously have a platform. You have an interesting take on fiber or something. Let's turn that into a product line, and you'll be the expert behind it, right? So that's what I would do all day, right? And that's kind of, again, what Golden Hippo's done, right? When you look at Dr. Gundry, these guys, they found like true experts, and they can leverage that expertise into amazing businesses, right? The other is, and again, this gets a little harder, but it is doable, is every university has just unending patents that they're trying to commercialize, and they really have no way to do that. So a lot of times, we've done this is, if you approach universities and say, listen, I'd like to consumerize this, and it's either like a gadget or something like that. That's another way you can do it. And then the other is, I actually wrote an article for Forbes on this, is what I call pink ocean innovation, because everybody talks about blue ocean, red ocean, right? What I found is like blue ocean is really difficult. It's really difficult. Why? Because it's not just that you have to educate the consumer about your product. You have to even explain that this is a problem they need to care about, right? So when we had this spray to kill airborne germs, now it seems very logical in the age of COVID why you should care about that. In 2012, that was like very difficult to explain, right? People really didn't understand it. It was very expensive to explain. So what pink ocean innovation is, the idea that you go into a category that is proven, right? So the one I always talk about is lip balms, right? Lip balms, like if my daughter or my wife bought another lip balm in the house, like I literally think we keep that industry in business. There are so many takes off a basic lip balm, right? Like you have like Burt's Bees, which is like organic beekeeper. It's owned by Clorox. You have EOS, like the egg-shaped pastel thing. You have Lip Smackers, that's like their only shtick. Again, I'm not saying this negatively, but like their main shtick is like 10,000 different flavors, right? There's so many different ways. But what I know going in that category, proven category, I don't have to explain what a lip balm is, right? So that's the approach we took with probiotics. 10 years earlier, I think it's really difficult to explain, like, did you know there's good germs you should put in your body? People would say, like in mid 2005, like, what are you, I'm not going to do that, right? Yeah. Now we came on the back of like the Culturelles, the Aligns, like these mega brands that Danons that had explained over a decade, like your microbiome and gut health is really important. All we did is we came in and said, hey, you've heard about good bacteria. Did you know there's good fungi? That's you know what I mean? So like pink ocean innovation is the idea you go into a category that's proven and you find, some sort of differentiator.
Nice.
So
you've done that really well. And as the space has matured around you too, I remember watching the Joe Rogan podcast with Paul Stamets about mycology and just about mushrooms. And it really was just mind blowing, the power that fungi, have in our world, the role that they play in our world. It's such an interesting topic. That's maybe for another one down the road.
Yeah, so there's interesting guys like my buddy Taro at Four Sigmatic doing like mushroom coffee, the mushroom revival guy, obviously Paul Stamets. They're sort of doing like, actual mushrooms, and like medicinal mushrooms versus like, it is all fungi, but we're sort of doing internal fungi, right?
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, we're almost wrapped up here, but there was one last topic I wanted to, well, there's actually two ones. One of them you mentioned, and I just want to clarify. It was right after the intro. You mentioned, early on in your career, you bought a brand from GlaxoSmithKline and then applied D2C principles to that?
What we did was we did buy an old GlaxoSmithKline brand called Oasis, right? So it was like a dry mouth brand, very, very niche, right? So what we then did was we saw like, okay, building off that brand, we could actually build bigger retail brands, because again, what people don't realize is there's this whole category of what we call like orphan brands, right? So the GSKs, the P&Gs of the world, they have brands that are like, let's say 20 million and under in revenue, that for them just do not move the needle. It's just not even worth the time of day for them to deal with. And if you approach them, a lot of them are willing to entertain selling, right? So that's basically what we did. A company in Cleveland had bought it from them, and like a year later we bought it from them, and it was this phenomenal brand that had just been underloved, for lack of a better term. So we got major distribution. We got a really good broker who actually really cared about getting into the game. So that's one of the other things that I think is underutilized, is going to, like, again, I know you guys heard that podcast with Ty Lopez. It's a different version of what he's doing, right? He's finding these at a bigger scale, these well-known brands, and then taking them D2C. What we go and do, and we didn't do this with BIOHM, but we were looking for brands that were sort of in that sub $10 million category that had just been left to rust, for lack of a better term. Here's the way to look at it, right? there's some guy sitting in a cubicle at P&G, and he doesn't want to sell tooth floss, right? He wants to work on Tide, right? He wants to be like the Tide man, right? So like those brands that are sort of small brands, and I'm not, P&G is an amazing company, all that good stuff. But it's just human nature, right? Like those little brands are sort of stepping stones to the major brands, right? But that little brand is actually huge, so there's a lot of brands out there that, then there's brokers, and, you can sort of get the word out, like you're looking for brands, and, they can actually, you can get them at a very good value, but it takes a while.
Very cool. I think that I'm glad we touched on that, because I think that's not a mindset that a lot of people have in this whole relational world between the big D2C guys and the upstarts, where the big guys would say it's nothing to me, but to someone who's a hungry D2C mind and with a big plan, it could be just life altering and could bring that brand up to that level where it might even be reacquired. That would be interesting.
Well, and the thing that the opportunity is now, which when we were doing this really wasn't the opportunity, is taking these sort of $3 to $10 million retail brands that long-term likely will not survive at retail, it's just too competitive, and turning them into D2C brands, right? Because there's a lot of these brands that people love, and they go, like, I don't know, like Bacitracin or something like that, something that people buy it, right? But they would buy it online, they'd buy it on Amazon. And again, for a big CPG company, it's just not worth the effort to create like an excellent D2C brand off it. They're busy trying to do that for their big brands, right? So I think that's really an opportunity.
Nice. Well, this interview has just flown by. I think we'll have to have you on again in the future. Maybe we can talk a bit more about funding next time. I want to know, do you have any sort of parting words, any sort of final advice you have for the D2C listeners out there?
Don't raise money unless you have to. You probably need double the amount of money you think you do, and it is going to take a lot longer than you think it is. And it sounds cliche, but it is, I promise you, the most true thing you will come across. And the other thing is, it's hard, right? The hardest thing about any of this is just sort of making progress. But again, the classic cliche, if it was easy, everyone would do it. It is definitely doable, but it comes down to like, are you willing to be the last man standing?
Yeah. And that really behooves all entrepreneurs listening to this to really focus on EBITDA, which is something that you go back to that beginning, where you don't have to be reliant on injections of capital all the time. Really focus on your bottom line right away, as soon as you can.
Right. And delay raising it for as long as possible, because the more listen, any investment is about showing them it's a de-risked opportunity. So the more risky, the less they're willing to pay, and the less risky, more they want to be in your world. And that's actually the best situation to be in. So again, like a lot of people, especially there's sort of Silicon Valley mindset, like, oh, I want to raise, I want to do all these things. Like you can get very good proof of concept for actually, $10,000, $20,000. Like, so just do that first before you actually try to raise.
Nice. Awesome. Anything final to add there, KG?
No, just a classic interview closer. Is there anything we shouldn't have asked you is there anything we should have asked you that we didn't?
I don't think so. This was good. We covered a ton.
I agree. I can't wait. We're going to share this in the My First Million group. Hopefully that'll be okay. I love the fact that we kind of came together that way. And I think there's a lot of other entrepreneurs there that would love to hear this as well. So thanks so much. If you haven't subscribed yet, go to directtoconsumer.co. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. I guess next week we'll be featuring this as our interview next week, and we'll be pulling out some of the amazing knowledge bombs, value bombs. We don't do it with every podcast, but I'm pretty sure this is one where we're gonna dive deep and make sure that we isolate some of these really great tips that you've brought to the table here. So we're excited for that.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Nice. Cheers. Okay. See you on the My First Million boards.